In cloud and DevOps, networking is not a side topic, it's the backbone. It's the layer that connects everything: compute, network, storage, databases, load balancers, security, literally everything. It decides how system scales, it decides how traffic flows, how services communicate, and how they stay secure. And when this layer is weak, everything feels confusing. Now let's take some real examples. The recent outage with AWS, the 502 or 504 errors you see on your browser, APIs timing out under load, the slow loading page you see on your application. At the core of it all, it's networking. And trust me, I've been the #1 victim of this. In almost every interview in my career, networking was where I struggled the most. Initially, the questions were more around OSI and protocol level, and today they're all about service mesh and distributed systems level. The depth has evolved as well as the expectations have evolved. So I decided to break up networking in a way where you'll actually understand what you are stepping into from ground up. In this video, I've structured everything into 5 core pillars of networking. Starts with core fundamentals, infrastructure networking, the concepts you need to know within a cloud environment, container and distributed system networking, and finally security and performance. And in this particular pillar, I will also cover the networking requirements for AI workloads. By the end of this video, you will not just be interview ready for networking specific questions, you'll also be a little more confident in applying them to your real world cloud environment, whether you're building systems or troubleshooting them. It serves both. And if you already know networking, this will serve as a complete structured revision in one place. Let's get into it now. So pillar 1 is all about the core fundamentals. Let's start with the most foundational concept, that is IP addressing. Before we even dive into it, let's take an example. Think of it in this way. If houses didn't have addresses, how would you actually deliver a letter or any package or get your Amazon package delivered? That's exactly what IP addresses solve. They give every device on a network a unique identity so the data knows where it needs to go. So IPv4 is a version you'll see most often. It's a 32-bit address written by 4 numbers separated by periods. Each number can be between 0 to 255, something like this on the screen. Since each number can be between that limit, there are roughly 4.3 billion addresses possible within the IPv4 space, which sounds like a lot, but we ran out of IP addresses. So IPv6 version was created to solve that. This version has 128 bits. It's written in hexadecimal groups, something like you see in the screen. So practically unlimited address space. So with scaling, we are not really hitting any limits. Now this is the IPv4 versus IPv6 comparison that you need to know. The header structures are also different. IPv4 headers are a bit more complex. They include fields like TTL, that is time to live, other flags, and some more options. IPv6 on the other hand simplified this. They had no options field, no TTL, and instead they use hop limits. Now this hop limit is something you need to understand. This limit controls how many routers, basically hops, a packet can pass through before it gets discarded. So each time a packet passes a router, the hop limit decreases by 1. And when the limit reaches 0, the packet gets dropped. This is basically a mitigation strategy for packets from looping forever in the network. Another difference between IPv4 and IPv6, the source and destination addresses jump from 32 bits to 128 bits. So these are the main key things you need to know. In cloud environments, you'll almost always work with IPv4s internally. Your VPC CIDR ranges, your subnet, pod IPs in Kubernetes, all are IPv4. But understanding IPv6 is important as system scales globally. Now our next component within this pillar is subnetting and CIDR. IP addressing alone isn't enough by itself when you're setting up a network. You need to organize and segment those addresses as well. This is where subnetting and CIDR comes in. Subnetting is like dividing city into neighborhoods. Instead of a massive flat network where each device can see other device, you break it into smaller segments. This helps controls a lot of things like traffic, helps in improving performance so the devices within the same subnet can communicate faster, and most critically, it helps with security. Basically, you're isolating network. So if one subnet is compromised, it doesn't mean automatically all others are. So one device, one subnet, if it gets compromised by some hackers, there's no communication path with other subnets. So you see the security piece here. The next component is CIDR, aka classless inter-domain routing. It's basically a notation system we use to describe those subnets efficiently. The format looks like this. So you see the /24, it tells you that the first 24 bits are basically the network prefix. That's the fixed address. So the remaining 8 bits are basically available for host addresses. All in all, if you calculate it, this subnet can hold 254 usable hosts. And in your day-to-day cloud job, when you're creating a VPC, what you start with is by giving a CIDR block range to your network. Then you carve out subnets from that same VPC for different resources, like for public resources and for private resources. We'll dive into this in our cloud networking section. Now, key thing to note here is understanding CIDR notation isn't an optional thing for cloud engineers. It comes up in every VPC design conversation. And the good news is you don't have to calculate everything in your head. There are tools that helps you visualize and validate these CIDR ranges so you don't make a mistake. Now you can use CIDR calculators like IPCalc, Subnet Calculator, or even built-in cloud validation tools. So make sure you use it before we move further. You also need to understand about broadcast address. Think of it as a special IP address that is used to send a message across all devices within a subnet. That's why the name broadcast. It is an important concept to know for device discovery, address resolution, and majorly all the activities that requires one-to-all communication. So keep that in mind. Now, before we move further, make sure you're well versed with IP addresses. Try a tool, enter this address space 10.0.0.0/16. See what all things it gives you. That is the key point. You'll see this as a response. It is extremely important for cloud deployment. Whenever you are designing your VPC architecture, splitting for multi-zone deployment, although there could be times in interview questions around there are two VPCs using the same space, how will you peer them? The answer is it won't work because they have overlapping CIDRs and that will break routing. So make sure you're getting comfortable with CIDR calculation, then that will really help you with cloud and other networking projects. Our next component within the fundamentals pillar is ports and protocols. Now, IP addresses gets traffic to the right machine, but how does the machine know which application to hand that traffic to? That's what ports do. Think of IP address as the address of a large building. It will help you get to the building, but inside that building there might be multiple floors. The port numbers are the specific floors. Ports are important because it tells the system which service or process should receive the traffic. Now, this is very important for interviews. When they're talking about ports, it might not be a direct question, but your overall understanding whether you know that multiple services can run on a single host machine and can be accessed through different ports. So same IP address, different ports, different services. They may also test whether you understand port mapping, especially in containerized environments. For example, in Docker, your application might run inside a container on port 3000. But in order to access that container, you can map it like this. Host port 80 mapped to container port 3000. So externally, when user hits port 80 and internally the container still listens on port 3000. So the port mapping bridges the gap. This mapping layer is very critical in Kubernetes and Docker. Now, these are the few ports that you need to know as a DevOps engineer. Port 22 for SSH, port 80 for HTTP, port 443 for HTTPS, port 3306 for MySQL, 5432 for PostgreSQL, 6443 for Kubernetes API server, and 1994 Prometheus. Now, our next component is protocols. Now, protocols are the rules that define how data is packaged and transmitted across network. You need to know all these protocols. TCP is used as a reliable connection-oriented protocol. It confirms delivery between two devices. Then UDP is faster but connectionless, and also there is no delivery guarantee. Next is ICMP. It's used for diagnostic. For example, whenever you run ping with an IP address, this protocol is used to test the network connectivity. Then there is ARP, that is Address Resolution Protocol. It is used inside a local network when you need to know the MAC address of a device for which you already know the IP address. Then there's TLS and SSL protocols used for encrypted data traffic. BGP is another protocol that is very critical. It's a routing protocol. So by default, it exchanges routes between larger networks and cloud providers. It also decides the best path for the internet traffic. It's a crucial protocol for cloud environment. Then SMTP, which is a simple mail transfer protocol. This is the protocol you use to send emails between servers. Now, our next piece is OSI and TCP/IP models. I've always struggled explaining OSI and TCP/IP models. So let's see how I do it today. Let me know in the comments if I did a good job after this. Now, these two models are like framework. It helps you understand how networking works in layers. OSI has 7 layers. So let me explain with an example. Think of it, you're sending a document to a friend. There's an application layer where you write the document, whether it's in Word or Google Doc. Then there's a presentation layer where this file gets formatted and encrypted so that no one else other than your friend can read it. Number 3 layer is session layer. You start a connection, like you open a chat on WhatsApp or you start an email. So you have to open that connection with your friend. Now the next few layers are something that's not visible to you. We enter into transport layer. This document is broken down into smaller pieces and numbered so it can be reassembled correctly. Now in the network layer, the system decides the route to your friend's house using the IP address. Next is the data link layer. It finds the correct device on the local network using a MAC address. And the last is the physical layer. The actual data travels through cables, Wi-Fi signals, or fiber optics. Each layer has one job and together they ensure that the document reaches your friend correctly and completely. Now TCP/IP on the other hand simplifies everything into 4 practical layers. There's again the application layer where you use email, WhatsApp or Google Drive to send a document. Then there's the transport layer. TCP again ensures all parts of the document arrive correctly and in order, while UDP would send it quickly without checking. The third layer is the internet layer. The system figures out the best route to your friend's address using their IP. And the last layer is the network access layer. The data travels over Wi-Fi, cables or fiber and reaches the correct device on the local network. This is basically the practical version of OSI. Whenever there's a difference, OSI was always theoretical. It was never implemented as it is. TCP/IP became the actual standard the internet runs on. Now, why does it matter for you as a DevOps engineer? Because when something breaks, you diagnose it by layers. A packet not reaching its destination could be a network layer routing issue, transport layer, some SSL handshake failure. And so debugging issue and understanding which which layer failed is the piece you need to be good at. Now, before we move further, within both these models, there's a process called SL-TLS handshake. This is where the client and server authenticate each other and agree on authentication keys before actually exchanging information. It's a very important interview question. You need to understand how SSL handshake works. So think of it like this. When you connect to an HTTP site, the server sends its certificate and a public key. Your browser then creates a session key, securely shares it with the server, and both use that key to encrypt the rest of the communication. A lot of times you'll be debugging the SSL handshake failures, so make sure you're well versed with it. Now we enter into pillar 2, that is network infrastructure. Here we'll be discussing about router, hubs, and switches. There are 3 devices, they have very different jobs. Hubs are basically a bit lame. They receive data and broadcast it to every device that's connected to them. Now every device has to sort out what's meant for them. Almost nobody uses hubs anymore, but you need to understand why they were replaced. Now our next device is switches. They're the smarter one. They learn the MAC addresses of connected devices and only send data to specific devices it's meant for. Much more efficient and much less noise on the network. Our third device are routers. They operate at a higher level. They connect different network. For example, your home router connects your local network to an internet service provider. In cloud environments, a router decides how traffic flows between your VPC subnets and outside internet. So there's a very good highway analogy here. Routers are your major highway intersection. It determines which road your data takes across network. And switches, on the other hand, are like the intersection between neighborhoods. It directs traffic to the right house. Our next networking component here is VLANs. It's the virtual local area network. It lets you logically segment a network without needing separate physical hardware. Now what that means, a university, for example, might have one physical network, but separate VLANs for administration, faculty, students, as well as guests. So you may see like a guest network for your Wi-Fi connection. That's what VLANs mean here. Each group is isolated from other even when they share the same infrastructure. Our next piece is NAT. It's a network address translation. This is what makes it possible for your entire home or office to share one public IP address. NAT is basically configured on your router, and this router has one public IP address facing the internet. And internally, every device has a private IP address. So NAT is basically a process that translates between them, the inbound and outbound connection. In cloud environments, the reason NATs are important so that your private devices are secure and isolated, but at the same time, it can communicate with the internet. In cloud environments, NAT gateways are a very critical component. We'll discuss it in our next section. Our next component is VPNs, virtual private network. This creates an encrypted tunnel over the public internet. This is also how remote employees securely access corporate network. For example, if you're not on VPN, you might not be able to access the internal document. Reason being VPN. One of the key pieces with VPN is during migrations or with hybrid environments where you have on-premises data center and then you have a cloud environment. Here you connect your on-prem data center with your cloud VPC via a side-by-side VPN. Our next component is load balancers. As the name suggests, it balances load. It distributes incoming traffic across multiple servers. But the reason being, if you don't have a load balancer, all the traffic might go to one server and maybe overwhelm it, and eventually it'll crash. Like think of a popular restaurant. One waiter can't serve every table. The manager, who's the load balancer, assigns tables to different waiters, keeping the workload balanced. In cloud, you will work with different types of load balancers. Application, which is HTTP, HTTPS layer. Then there are network load balancers. It's very crucial for ultra high throughput. And then also there's like external and internal load balancers. Next component is firewalls. These are your first line of defense. They manage and control your incoming and outgoing traffic based on the rules you define. In cloud, this maps to security groups in AWS and cloud firewalls in GCP. So do dive into how firewalls are configured and how inbound, outbound policies are set. Next is our domain name system. Remember we spoke about IP addresses. Those are the numbers. We humans cannot memorize those numbers. When you want to go to a website or an application, how will you connect to it if you don't remember those numbers? This is where DNS comes in. It's an important piece that converts human readable names into IP addresses. Simple example that you might have heard 1,000 times. When you type google.com, DNS resolves it to an IP address. By default, when you type a domain name, your browser first checks the local DNS cache just to see if an IP address already exists. If not cached, the request is sent to a recursive DNS resolver, which queries other DNS servers. Then this resolver follows a hierarchy. It asks a root DNS server, where can I find .com? The root server responds with a TLD server for .com. Now the resolver again goes to the TLD server, which is the top level domain server, and asks for where is google.com. This TLD responds with an authoritative DNS server for that domain. Now again it comes back to the resolver and then it asks that authoritative server for the exact IP address. The authoritative server returns the IP, the resolver caches it so that it doesn't have to go back and forth. Your local machine also caches it, and then finally the browser connects to the IP. This process is very crucial to understand, so make sure you can explain this resolver hierarchy properly. Let's jump into our pillar 3, that is cloud networking. The first component here is VPC. We did discuss about it quite a few times previously with CIDR and Subnet, but but let's dive into it a bit more here. If you work with any cloud environment, AWS, GCP, Azure, OCI, IBM, everything lives inside a VPC. It's the virtual private cloud. It's a foundation concept of cloud networking. This VPC gives you an isolated private section of cloud where you define your own virtual network. Now, in a multi-tenant cloud where thousands of customers share the same cloud infrastructure, this VPC makes sure your resources are isolated from everyone else by default. So when you create a VPC, you define its IP address space using CIDR notation. A common setup is this. This gives you 65K IP addresses to work with inside the VPC. Now, subnets and route tables are the same as we discussed in our fundamentals, but in the cloud term. Within VPC, you carve out subnets, basically smaller IP blocks for different purposes. You'll have two types of subnets, public and private. Public subnets are internet facing, your load balancers, your bastion hosts, potentially your web servers like the front-end servers. They all have a route to an internet gateway. An internet gateway is another component that helps with the communication layer between resources from public subnet to internet. Private subnets, on the other hand, hold resources that should never be directly accessible from the internet. Your application servers, your databases, they have no direct route to internet. And if they need outbound access from internet for updates, installation, API calls, they go through a NAT gateway. And this NAT gateway sits in the public subnet. So the hops here would be the resources from private subnet goes to the NAT gateway, which resides in the public subnet, which then further routes the request through internet gateway to the external network. Route tables are another components within cloud. It's basically how traffic flows inside a cloud network. They contain rules, routes, which tells traffic where to go. The traffic can go from a public subnet to private subnet and internal to any other subnet or even to outside internet. Next component is content delivery networks. CDN solves a very fundamental problem, that is latency. For example, if your application servers are hosted in India and you have users who want to access those servers from US, there's a physical limit how fast that data can travel. Now, CDN helps you put your content closer to the users. They maintain a network of edge servers on data centers around the world. So when a user requests a site's static assets, they get routed from the nearest edge servers, not your origin servers that are in India. It helps with the caching use case, which is a very important system design concept. But apart from that, it also helps with DDoS mitigation. Think of it like when attackers are trying to overwhelm your system, CDN comes in as a savior. There's another component called Web Application Firewall. It protects web applications by filtering and blocking malicious IP addresses. So any traffic coming from attackers won't hit the server because WAF is there to block it. Let's jump into a pillar 4, that is containers and distributed systems. The first component here is Docker networking. When you run containers, they need to communicate with each other, with the host, with external services. Docker solves this through different networking modes. First one is the bridge mode, which is the default one. It creates a private internal network within your host. Containers on the same bridge can talk to each other, but at the same time, they're isolated from outside and can only reach the internet through the host. This is what is used for local development. Next, we have the host mode. It removes the network isolation. The container shares the host network stack directly. So there's no private internal network here. The reason being, it can directly access the internet. There's a lower overhead, but at the same time, you lose isolation. Then we have the overlay mode. This is for multi-host communication. When your containers are running on different machines in a cluster, they need to talk to each other. Mode comes in. Also, this is what Docker Swarm uses. The key thing to understand here is Docker assigns each container its own IP address, but those IPs are ephemeral, which means they'll go away when the container restarts. That's why we use Docker service names for container to container communication and not IP. Same like DNS. You use the domain name. Our next piece is Kubernetes networking. In summary, Kubernetes networking is very complex. So if you don't get it, don't beat yourself up. No one understands it. Just kidding. People do. So there are certain rules that Kubernetes networking is built upon. Rule 1. Every pod gets its own IP address. Now, if you don't know what pod is, it's the smallest deployable unit within a Kubernetes environment. Containers run within pods, within nodes, within a Kubernetes clusters. These are the layers. Now, rule number 2. Every pod can communicate with every other pod using IP. Rule number 3. Nodes or host machines can communicate with pods without NAT. Like network address translation is not required. This sounds simple, but implementing it is very complex. That's where CNI plugins come in. These are the container network interface, such as Calico, Flannel, Cilium. These are the tools that implement the networking layer within your Kubernetes cluster. Basically, they create and manage how pods get IP addresses and communicate securely within a cluster. So CNI plugins are something you need to dive into further. There's also eBPF. It's a Linux kernel technology which lets networking and security tools process and control traffic efficiently within an operating system. So eBPF comes in as a security layer as well. Now, these are the layers of communication within a Kubernetes cluster. Number 1 is container to container. Containers within the same pod shares the same network namespace. They communicate over local host. Pod to pod. Different pods communicate using their pod IPs. And this is what is routed by CNI plugin. Then there's pod to service communication. Rather than hitting the pod IPs directly, because IPs change, you hit a service service, a stable virtual IP that load balances across healthy pods. And kubeproxy is a component that maintains this routing table within the Kubernetes cluster. Now, our fourth communication layer is external to service, load balancer service, ingress controllers. These expose your cluster to external traffic. So you get an external endpoint or an IP address, and then the request gets routed within your internal cluster. Now, there could be many troubleshooting questions here within the Kubernetes networking space. A pod cannot reach another pod in a different namespace. What would be your debugging path? Now, within Kubernetes, you also get to set network policies. That policy can block your cross namespace traffic. Other debugging step would be to check the core DNS resolution, which we'll cover in the next section. So you have to do a lot of systematic debugging across layers. The next component within this pillar is service discovery and service meshes. Microservices architecture, you might have dozens or hundreds of services. They scale up and down dynamically. Now, their IPs also change. How does service A know how to reach service B? That is service discovery. Now, core DNS is the DNS server within your Kubernetes cluster that helps resolve service names to their internal pod or service IP addresses. So whenever a new service instance comes up, it registers itself with core DNS. When service A wants to know how to reach service B, it queries this registry to find it, and core DNS maintains it. In Kubernetes, you reach a service name like this. Now, service meshes takes this further. Tools like Istio adds a sidecar proxy to every pod. This is the Envoy proxy. All traffic in and out of that pod goes through that proxy. Now, what this gives you helps with traffic management. If a request came in and there's a client timeout, there could be some retries that could be set through this proxy. So you can have multiple retries. Then there's also a security layer here that is a mutual TLS between all the services. Service meshes also helps with observability. So distributed tracing, metrics. You can do everything without changing your application code. Since it's a sidecar container, it does a lot of heavy lifting, but it also adds a bit of operational complexity and latency overhead because every request goes through the proxy and then to the application container. But at the same time, it gives visibility and control. So you have to understand the trade-off. Now, our last pillar, security and performance. Before we jump into anything, you need to know about encryption. Data in transit must be encrypted, full stop. This is done through TLS, which is the transport layer security protocol that makes the HTTP work. Remember we spoke about the TLS SSL handshakes earlier? This is what happens when you visit a website over HTTPS. Your browser and your server performs a TLS handshake. They negotiate a cipher, exchange certificates, and after that, it establishes an encrypted session. Everything after this is unreadable for anyone intercepting the traffic. In cloud environments, encryption in traffic applies everywhere. Between your users and your load balancer, between your load balancer and your application server, between your application server and databases, all those communications are encrypted. Also, from a compliance standpoint, such as GDPR, HIPAA, SOC2, encrypting data in transit isn't optional. It is required. Next, we have IDS. It's the intrusion detection system. It monitors network traffic and alert you when they see pattern that matches known threats. So basically, they observe and report. Then there's intrusion prevention system, aka IPS. It goes a step further. This doesn't just observe and report, it also blocks suspicious traffic in real time. Another main component within this pillar is zero trust. This is the architectural shift that's changing how enterprise security works. Traditional security operated with trust but verify. For example, if you were in your corporate network, by default you were trusted. VPN and URL. Zero trust flips this completely. Never trust. Always verify. Every request, internal or external, is treated as potentially hostile. You authenticate and authorize every single time. The reason it exists is because of the real world impact. Like there have been situations like this. For example, if an attacker compromises an employee's credentials, they still can't move laterally. Every system they try to access challenges and verifies them independently. Our next component is network monitoring, logging, and tracing. You can't really fix what you can't see. In distributed cloud systems, observability is everything. Network monitoring tools gives you continuous visibility into your performance metric, latency, packet loss, throughput, error rate. For instance, if there's a traffic spike, these networking tools helps with auto scaling. Then there's network logging. It captures a record of network activity. Every connection attempt in and out of VPC is logged. It's very critical for post-incident analytics. A third component is distributed tracing. This is what you need when your user reports that an API response is very slow and you have no idea which one of those 20 microservices is the bottleneck. So this activity helps you trace the journey of a request, where it goes, what's blocking it. Now we enter into the main component. This is very crucial for AI workloads as well. That is performance. Two concepts engineers often confuse. That is bandwidth and latency. And before I explain them, they aren't just traditional networking concepts anymore. They are directly relevant to AI infrastructure, especially how fast your model responds and how accurately it can serve requests under load. So pay attention to this one. Bandwidth is the width of your pipe, how much data can flow simultaneously. And latency is the delay, how long before data starts flowing. Now this becomes a very key point of conversation during AI inference. Basically, when your models are served in production, all the chatbot applications that you're using, Gemini, ChatGPT, Claude, when you're serving these models in production, two things determine the user experience. Number one, how fast the first token appears. You see that streaming response? You feel better, right, when the first word comes in. That is basically latency, also called as time to first token. And next is how subsequent token streams out. That is your throughput, which is bandwidth bound. For traditional global applications, applications, you reduce latency by deploying application closer to the users. Multi-region deployment, CDN, smart DNS. These all components help direct users to the nearest healthy instance. The same principle applies to AI inference pipelines as well. The AI infrastructure teams care deeply around where inference endpoints are deployed. Same region as users, edge inference for latency critical application, and use of high bandwidth interconnects like InfiniBand or Rocky, which is very critical for internode and intranode communication. Now, a final component is SDN, which is software defined network. Traditional networking was hardware defined. You bought physical switches and routers. You configured them manually. Changing your network means physically reconfiguring your hardware. Slow, expensive, error prone. SDN decouples the control plane, the intelligence that decides where traffic goes, from the data plane to the hardware that actually forwards the packet. The control plane here becomes the software, and now your network becomes programmable. So the main gist of it is you can configure your network through software rather than manually doing things on the hardware. This is what makes cloud networking possible at scale. Now, if you have made it till here, make sure you dive into these diagrams. These are basically comparisons, architecture diagrams, also why one component is used over other. Hope this video gave you a structured understanding of every networking concept you'll ever need. You can revisit this video before networking, also come back to it when you're debugging production issues, and you can also make it as a reference whenever concepts feel scattered. Networking is also not something you can memorize once. You build clarity around time. I'm still developing it, so I don't know where I am. If this helped, let me know in the comments what topic you want me to dive into next. And if you found this useful, make sure you share it with someone who's preparing for cloud and DevOps roles. See you in the next video.